Hey everyone, Nate the Feral Painter here, and in this video we're going to be painting up Captain Titus. Now this paint scheme is aimed at more like a centerpiece, maybe if you've got an ultramarine captain or you want a standout piece on the tabletop, then this video is going to be a little bit more aimed at that, some more details, and I'm going to go over some brush control, some alternative ways to do edge highlights, and overall just push your miniatures that little bit further. If you've got something like an army and you just want a standout piece, then this is the video for you. I'll also be going over some weathering techniques just to make them look a little bit more realistic, and as they are in the Spacemarine 2 game or the Warhammer Secret level on the Amazon show, and it'll just make everything stand out, push it a little bit into that Grimdark aesthetic. And as always, I'll be going over some alternative ways that you can apply these colour schemes, as it's the later portion of this video in the refinement stage where everything starts to come together and we do get into these refinements and ways that we can push our miniature that little bit further. So for the main colour of the armour, I did want to get some nice shadows and highlights in there, and of course I'll be going over the non-airbrush method. So if you don't have an airbrush, the colours and the order that they're going will appear on screen now, and these are just going to be built up over the layers with an airbrush. But of course, if you don't have an airbrush, don't worry about this stage at all. Or you can quickly go over and check out an alternative, an old video that I did a long time ago, where I just used like a stippling motion and some dry brushing to achieve the same effects. And if anything, you'll get a bit more of a worn armor look with that method as well. Don't think just because you've not got an airbrush that you can't still achieve the same results that I'm getting here. It's just a case of adding these colors on and trying to get some of those shadows and highlights. But of course, it's the later stage that I'm talking about where the refinements come in, which will really push this miniature. But if you really want to save time and you just want to do the refinement stage a little bit later, which will still look good, then you can just simply prime these in the macragge blue primer. You'll notice as well that my Captain Titus is in a little bit of a different pose to the one that comes from GW, and this was just a very simple kit bash. I'll be honest with you, I really don't like the pose that they went for this miniature, and doing it this way was the only one I could really use to make it just a little bit better. But I've just used a pistol, like an arm stretched out with a pistol kit, and I've chopped some little bits off the original model, added some chain and added the little Inquisition symbol, and then obviously I've had to use and chop out and trim down one of the side plates that he's got where his mag pistol will clip onto, and then of course I didn't go for the alternative head option without his helmet because it's the worst sculpt I've ever seen. That's just my opinion. You know, if you want to paint yours, then feel free to do that as well. One extra little kit bash I would add to this: don't use the helmet that comes in the box. If you want one that's a little bit more accurate to the actual Captain Titus himself, he does have like this skull emblem on his forehead, and these come regularly in most Space Marine kits. It's like, say if you're going to create a captain, it's one of those helmets. So I wish I'd have swapped that out, but I didn't notice until I'd actually painted up this guy. So I'd swap the head as well for this, but I just went for the helmeted option on this miniature. So now that you've got all his blue armor and all that bit's been completed, at this stage is a good stage to add any decals to his shoulder pauldron, which is just one of the basic ones. You actually do get one of these with it. I just use micro salt and micro set to set it into place, and then after that I gave everything a satin varnish. You know, at this point, if you do want to use a matte varnish, you can use a matte varnish, but I've noticed when looking at the game, you know, the armor and stuff does sort of have a little bit of a sheen to it, so that's why I went for the satin varnish, just to give it a little bit more of a shine, and then it's going to protect those layers underneath and also seal that decal in as well. Now I will be throughout this video skipping a couple of the colours and just little details, which is not really massively important to the actual overall, you know, subject of this video, which is more aimed at brush control and stuff. However, if you do want to know every single colour that I've used, these will be listed in the description below. Also, after you've added your varnish and everything is dry, at this point I actually went in with the black and painted any areas that I wanted on the miniature to be black as well. Now for his little tabards at the front and back, or his little skirt that he's got dangling from his belt, we're only going to be using 2 colours. And the reason I've done this is because, one, I can explain it and we don't need 4 or 5 different colours and adding an edge highlight to this and an edge highlight to that. What we're trying to achieve throughout this miniature is the more it rotates, the more different textures and looks and overall just different ways that the fabric looks to the armour, and it's got different sheens and all that sort of stuff. This is what's going to separate your miniature from the rest of your army and really going to push and elevate your painting style. But I'm going to give it a base coat of the burnt umber first of all, and this is going to act as our shadow. And then what we're going to do is just slowly start adding that deck tan to the burnt umber, a little bit at a time, and obviously we're going to thin this slightly with water. We don't want it a glaze consistency, we don't want it too thin or too thick. We just want it running off that brush. We don't want to overload our brush either. We're just going to add a small amount to our brush, wipe some off on like a tea towel or the back of your hand or a glove or whatever, and then slowly start to add these tippy-tappy, scratchy styles of painting. You really can't go wrong with this. There's no right or wrong. If you want to do it in dots, you can do it some dots, and then you can add some lines. This bit is just, it's just playful, this, and this will also learn you a lot more of the brush control if you're trying to achieve like better brush control. And it'll also learn you how much like paint to have on your brush, so you can't really go wrong with this stage. It's just a very nice playful stage that you can do. But all we're going to do is just keep adding a little bit of deck tan to each successive layer or highlight that we go up. You might have to add like 4 or 5 different layers, but again, it's also quite therapeutic to do it in this way. And as you start to get up those highlights, you want to be leaving some of that brown or that like mid-tone into the shadows, and down where the light's going to hit, that's where you really want to be just having the deck tan on its own. And when you're done, you'll have this nice tattered worn cloth effects where you can see some of the linen strands in it, or even just some of the weathering like scratches and stuff as it's weared down over time. These same colours can even be used on the moment of oaths, or alternatively just by changing that base tone colour, like we've got the burnt umber. And if you want to change that to a different brown or a lighter brown, that's entirely up to you. And what this will do, we're just using the deck tan, it'll keep it very similar, but it'll just alter that colour slightly, giving that separation and that variation of the different parts of the miniature. Now you will notice as this video goes through, like I said, there are going to be more parts that are painted. This is not really a tutorial on the exact colours and everything. They'll be in the link in the description below, as I said. But at this point, you just want to work your way around your miniature and make sure you've highlighted and base coated all the necessary sections out on the miniature before we move into the later stages. So at this stage we do need to add some panel lines and some shadows or some separation in between those gaps of his armour, and I'm not going to be using any methods that I've probably previously gone over on this channel. If you do want to check some of them out, you can use that, and alternatively you could even use the weathering stage to do this if you want to do that as well. If you've not maybe got the brush control, then I'd recommend using those alternative methods. But one way I've really been enjoying recently, and it don't involve any oils, enamels or special panel liners, anything like that, we're literally just going to use some watered down Abaddon black. I think it works really well for the Ultramarines, and it just gives everything that bit more punchy contrast. So I get some onto my wet palette, thin it down with some water, and because we've got the satin varnish on the miniature already, you are going to get a slight bit of capillary action as well. And using something like a 0 or a 00 paintbrush, this will just help it flow into those recesses, and it's just a case of manually painting in those lines. Like I said, it does require a little bit of brush control, but the end results are probably a little bit more punchier and contrasty than the alternative methods out there. Obviously, if you do make mistakes, you've got to wipe these away pretty quick, because if you're using oils and enamels, you've got a lot of working time. You can reactivate them and just wipe them away, but because this is an acrylic, it's going to dry fast. Obviously, I'd recommend wiping them away if you do make any mistakes along the way. Now at this portion of the video I want to talk about edge highlighting. Now this is not something I normally do on all my painting videos, but there's a way we can actually edge highlight without actually edge highlighting everything and ruining his miniature, and this way I'll just make everything look a little bit more realistic. It'll go in line with the light and shadows that we're trying to achieve, and it'll also overall just look that little bit better and battle worn. For this I'm going to be using Calgary blue first of all, and I'm just going to look at the miniature overall, and if you've done the airbrush method you'll be able to see where you've already added your highlights, and these are the only sections that we're really going to be concentrating on. If there's some areas that are massively in shadow, I'm just going to completely ignore them. And now rather than add the traditional straight line of the edge highlight, I'm going to do this broken up. So I'm just tapping and just leaving little bits out and just working my way across it, adding some little scratches here and there onto the armor as well. If I get towards like the end of the paint on my paintbrush and I know there's not much left on, I'll add some little tippy taps and scratches here and there around the armor, because this will just knock them back a little bit, and it'll overall just add to that worn, battle worn appearance. And because we're only edge highlighting those more like lighted points, this will just really enhance the light and shadow on your miniature as well. But just work your way around the entire miniature. Don't do all of it. Like I said, just pay attention to that light and shadow. If you've gone for like if you've just primed it in the macragge blue, hold it under a lamp and you'll see sort of where the light hits, where it's coming over his knee and the top of his head and the top of his shoulders. But I also just like adding these little scratches here and there around the miniature as well, just to give it that battle worn appearance, and edge highlighting. So he's got some battle damage actually sculpted onto the armor itself, and I also add a little bit to them as well. And then finally, if I really want to punch these up a little bit on some of the lighter spots, this is where you can add, you know, your standard Fenrisian grey and just add a little bit of that to your Calgary blue. Don't just go straight for it, because it'll be a little bit too much at this point. And it's just a case of repeating that only on the brightest points as well. If you do find that, you know, it's a little bit too standout-ish and you want to knock it back a little bit, what I did, I actually got some macragge blue and I glazed over those areas just to knock everything back a little bit and just give it a little bit more of a subtle appearance. For areas like his helmet and some areas where you might actually want to add some chips, I just went back in with the Abaddon Black and just very delicately added some chips to his helmet and the knee pads and areas that are going to get scratched and scraped up. And then if you really want to and get posh, then you can even go into those black parts and add a little bit of silver or like Iron Warriors, just to show the bare metal underneath, depending on how much battle damage you want. Don't go overboard with this, because it can actually just kill the miniature a little bit. But if you really want to, then I'd highly recommend just adding just a tiny little dot of silver in and around those areas as well. Whilst I've got that silver out, this is where I'm going to do the chainsword, just as we did adding the chips on the miniature, just adding some dots and also some little scratches to that chainsword as well. Now the last thing to do to this miniature, once you've completed all your other stages, eye lenses. I've covered those extensively here on this channel. If you want to learn how I did these, then check out my Black Templars video. But the last thing to do is obviously add some dirt and grime to this miniature. And to do that, I have used the Villainy Goons grime. I did put a little bit of decrepit filth in there. This is the phase 2 launch. They're not out just yet, but they will be coming very soon. It's not necessary to add that, but you know, the Goons grime or just some sort of oil or enamel, I think is essential to add some dirt and grime to these Space Marines, which again does appear in the artwork and all of the other games and everything like that. And it just really ties everything together, gives it that more realistic appearance, and overall just improves the look of this 40k Grimdark miniature. And to do this, I get some Goons grime onto some baking paper, and then I just get some mineral spirits. If you've ever used oils or enamels, they're a lot different to acrylics. Once they've dried, you can actually reactivate them with mineral spirits, or white spirits as it's called in some other places. And I just stipple this around areas. I'm not covering the entire miniature in, depending on how dirty you want it to be. I'm only adding it here and there to like the shoulder pauldrons and the lower extremities of the miniature where he's been tumbling through the terrain and all that sort of stuff. And then I give it around 15 minutes to dry, or you can use a blow dry to speed up this process. And then I get a sponge or a Q-tip just lightly moistened with mineral spirits, and just come back in and remove that enamel back off. And it dries really matte, and it'll just leave behind these little granular deposits, just overall adding to that weathered appearance. If you want to add some streaks in there as well, get your brush, put a little bit of mineral spirits on it, and then streak it down. And then finally, I just added a little bit of pigment powder to the base and brushed it up onto his legs just to finish off and tie everything together. And that brings us to the end of this video. Now I know it's not been like one of my traditional tutorials where I go in depth with everything. I just really wanted to come on and talk about like different ways of doing things. You know, we all get stuck in this Games Workshop way of doing it, which is like layer, highlight, edge highlight, and overall I want we've been able to take away from this that, you know, just using certain colours, like the tabard and his little skirt thing, you can just use 2 colours for that. But I just hope you've been able to take away that there are different ways that you can apply paint to these miniatures using the stippling and the scratchy method, and just doing things a little bit different to what you usually would completely change the look of your miniature and improve your brush control and your painting overall. So I hope you have enjoyed this video and been able to take a little bit of inspiration away from it, or just even thinking about the different ways that you can paint your miniatures. I do have a plethora of different ultramarine videos and tutorials on this channel, so be sure to check them out. I've been Nate the Feral Painter, and until next time guys, I will catch you in the next video.